You say you want to be happy, but what if that's a lie? Not a conscious lie, of course. You repeat the desire like a mantra. I just want to be happy. You chase it in relationships, in success, in fleeting moments of distraction. You scroll through motivational quotes, romanticize healing, and drink tea from mugs that say choose joy. But when you're finally alone, when the world goes quiet, something inside you resists. Not the chaos, not the stress, but the calm, the peace, the terrifying silence of happiness. Why? Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow and feel nothing but joy, no anxiety, no dissatisfaction, no guilt dragging you back into your past. You are, at last, content. Now ask yourself truly, what would you do next? Would you finally write that book, love that person, take that leap? Or would you feel empty, exposed, like a soldier who has trained for war his whole life only to realize there is no battle left to fight? It's a haunting paradox. We claim to seek happiness, yet structure our entire lives around avoiding it. We chase problems like oxygen. We feed on conflict, guilt, and unresolved wounds because they mean something. They give us identity. They give us purpose and happiness. It threatens to take all that away. Think about the people you know, those who always seem to find a reason to suffer. They sabotage peace the moment it arrives. They start fights when things are going well. They resist forgiveness even when it's offered. Are they broken? Or are they just terrified of what happens when there's nothing left to fix? You might be one of them. Carl Jung once wrote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. What if happiness isn't the final destination but the mirror that forces you to confront who you are when there's nothing left to run from? Maybe this is the great contradiction of the human condition. We don't fear sadness. We fear wholeness, because wholeness demands responsibility. Wholeness means we can no longer blame the past, no longer hide behind trauma, no longer wear pain as armor. It leaves us naked in the light, forced to live not as survivors, but as beings worthy of peace. And that, perhaps, is more terrifying than suffering. So, here's the question that rattles everything. What if you don't actually want to be happy? What if you are addicted to the very pain you claim you want to escape? Would you know who you are without it? Would you know how to live? The rest of this journey doesn't offer quick comfort or simple platitudes. It cuts deeper into the architecture of your psyche, into the philosophy of your suffering, into the strange seduction of staying broken. And if you dare to follow it, it might dismantle every illusion you've built around what happiness really. Because before you can be truly happy, you must confront the possibility that you've never really wanted to be. There's a strange comfort in being miserable, not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. And what is familiar often feels safer than what is truly good. This is where the roots of our aversion to happiness begin, deep in the psyche, tangled in the contradictions of what it means to be human. You weren't born afraid of happiness, but somewhere along the line, you learned to associate it with danger. Maybe not physical danger, but the danger of change, of losing control, of vulnerability. Happiness exposes. It demands presence. It asks you to surrender the stories you've clung to, the ones that give your suffering meaning. Pain, on the other hand, is loyal, predictable. If you've suffered long enough, it becomes part of your identity. You begin to equate discomfort with authenticity, believing that happiness must be superficial, naive, a delusion reserved for the unaware. Carl Jung saw this clearly. In his work, he explored the shadow, the hidden self, the repressed, the unwanted. He argued that healing doesn't come from chasing light, but from integrating the darkness. Yet here's the twist. If your shadow contains not only anger and trauma, but also your right to joy, then your resistance to happiness isn't just psychological. It's philosophical. It's existential. Enter Friedrich Nietzsche, who warned against the narcotic of false contentment. He believed most people would rather numb themselves with illusions than face the abyss of true freedom. And freedom, Nietzsche understood, is terrifying, because once you're truly free, there's no one left to blame. no one to save you, no narrative to cling to? The existentialists carried this even further. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free, that we must invent meaning in a world that offers none. But here's the hidden cost of that freedom. Happiness is no longer a gift. It becomes a burden. You must create it yourself, sustain it, own it, and when it slips through your fingers, there's no God, no fate, no villain to hold accountable. Just you. And that is a lonely, disorienting truth. So you self-sabotage, not out of weakness, but out of unconscious design. You return to what you know. You reach for the pain that has defined you, the dysfunction that has kept you company, because to let it go would mean stepping into the unknown, into joy, into responsibility. Arthur Schopenhauer once claimed that happiness is an illusion, a brief reprieve between sufferings. But perhaps the illusion is not happiness itself but our belief that we want it, without understanding what it actually demands of us. Look around at society. Entire industries profit from your discontent. Advertisers prey on your sense of lack. Politicians stir fear to win loyalty. Social media rewards outrage and comparison. The culture trains you to want just enough happiness to keep functioning, but not so much that you become untouchable, sovereign, independent, whole. There is no market for the truly content, because the truly content are not easily manipulated. They are dangerous in their peace. They are rebels in a world addicted to drama. And what about love? Even love can become a transaction of wounds. People unconsciously seek partners who mirror their unresolved pain, not because they want to suffer, but because suffering feels familiar, predictable, safe. True happiness in love would require openness, trust, and self-worth, and these are things many would rather not risk. Here lies the paradox again. The path to happiness is wide open, yet almost no one dares to walk it, not because they can't, but because doing so would mean shedding their armor, stepping out of the familiar war zone, and admitting that perhaps they were never as powerless as they pretended to be. You were not taught to be happy. You were taught to survive, and survival is not the same as living. So the hidden problem isn't that happiness is elusive. It's that you've built your identity around not having it, and anything that threatens that identity, no matter how beautiful, feels like a threat. But now you've seen it, haven't you? The blueprint of your avoidance, the psychological and philosophical scaffolding holding up your misery like a monument to your past. You've begun to notice the lies whispered by your ego, the comfort found in dysfunction, the subtle fear that maybe, just maybe, happiness would require too much from you. And yet, something in you still wonders, what would life look like if you stopped running from joy? If that question lingers, then you're ready to go deeper into the hidden consequences of living in this unconscious state, because avoiding happiness doesn't just shape your thoughts. It shapes your entire world. You may think it's just a feeling, that this avoidance of happiness is a private, internal matter, but you're wrong. It's not just shaping your moods. It's shaping your reality, your relationships, your work, your sense of self. Every decision you make while fearing happiness plants seeds of a future you won't enjoy living in. Avoiding happiness silently rewires your life in subtle and destructive ways. You lower your standards and call it humility. You sabotage relationships and call it fate. You procrastinate on your dreams and call it responsibility. You numb your desires and call it maturity. You shrink your existence into a story where pain is the hero because it's the only character you've allowed to stay. This is not dramatization. This is neuroscience. The brain craves patterns, even dysfunctional ones, especially dysfunctional ones. When you repeatedly choose avoidance over joy, your brain strengthens that neural pathway like a muscle. Over time, the unfamiliar becomes threatening even if it's good, and happiness, if it's foreign to your internal landscape, will begin to feel unsafe and trustworthy. Wrong. Cognitive biases reinforce this. The confirmation bias ensures you only see what validates your pain. The negativity bias gives more weight to bad experiences than good ones. The status quo bias keeps you clinging to what you know even if it's killing your spirit. These aren't just flaws in thinking, they are traps. And once you're inside, the world begins to reflect the prison you've built. You attract people who echo your self-doubt. You stay in jobs that drain you because comfort is easier than transformation. You silence your voice, your creativity, your hope because deep down, a part of you believes you don't deserve joy. But this isn't just psychological, it's cultural. You were raised in a world that rewards dysfunction, a culture obsessed with productivity over purpose, consumption over contentment, appearance over authenticity. A society where suffering is romanticized, where the struggling artist, the hard-working martyr, the stoic achiever are glorified while the peaceful, joyful, deeply content person is dismissed as lazy, fake, or out of touch. Because contentment doesn't feed the machine. If you were truly happy, what would you stop buying? What distractions would no longer seduce you? What would it cost the world if you stopped needing to be fixed? You've been sold a lie. That happiness is the reward for obedience. That if you work hard enough, sacrifice long enough, suffer nobly enough, then one day maybe you'll earn the right to feel good. But that day never comes. Because the systems profiting off your misery aren't interested in your liberation, and you've internalized it. You've become your own warden. Think of how many dreams you've abandoned, not because they weren't possible, but because something in you whispered, "Who am I to want this?" That's the voice of inherited pain. That's the residue of a culture that taught you ambition must come with suffering, and joy must be earned through endurance. Now magnify this across generations. Whole families, communities, nations have built their lives around this narrative. They pass it down like heirlooms, trauma wrapped in tradition. Dysfunction disguised as discipline. Don't get your hopes up. Don't dream too big. Life isn't supposed to be easy. These aren't just phrases. They're programming. And the result? A civilization where apathy is normalized, where numbness is adaptive, where joy is ridiculed unless it's fleeting, packaged and posted online. Anything deeper is suspect. Anything lasting must be delusion. So you settle, and something becomes systemic. This is how people die without ever truly living. They stay in loveless marriages because it's safer than the unknown. They choose careers they hate because they were told passion doesn't pay. They stay small because they confuse self-protection with wisdom. But here's the cruel irony. The very fear meant to keep you safe becomes the architect of your slow, spiritual death. But here's the cruel irony. The very fear meant to keep you safe becomes the architect of your slow, spiritual death. Avoiding happiness is not neutral. It is corrosive. It erodes your potential. It poisons your perspective. It turns you into a version of yourself that survives, yes, but never thrives. And all the while, you tell yourself it's noble, that it's just how life is, that you're being realistic. But what if it's not realism? What if it's resignation? What if the reason you feel hollow isn't because life is meaningless, but because you've spent your whole life avoiding the one thing that could give it meaning? Imagine how different your world would look if you truly believed that happiness wasn't a trick, a trap, or a temporary high, but your natural state. Your rightful state. That realization is coming. But before you can reclaim it, you must rebel. You must dismantle the inner machinery that's been trained to fear joy and build suffering into it, its very identity. Because now you've seen the cost. You've traced the roots. You've felt the weight. The question is no longer, why am I unhappy? The question is, what would happen if I refused to stay that way? You've been lied to. Not once, not subtly, but repeatedly, and with such precision that the lie began to sound like love, like guidance, like wisdom passed down from the weary mouths of ancestors, too broken to believe in beauty. But it wasn't wisdom, it was woundedness, masquerading as truth. Now you're standing at the threshold. On one side, everything you've ever known. On the other, something terrifying, yet luminous. What if you walked away from your suffering, Would you even recognize yourself without it? This is where the rebellion begins, not with rage, not with defiance, but with a radical, intimate choice to stop betraying your own joy, to stop mourning a life you haven't lost yet, to stop feeding the fire of fear with the ashes of possibility. You must understand, the world will not give you permission to be happy. If anything, it will punish you for it, because when you decide to pursue joy with unapologetic hunger, you become ungovernable. You no longer respond to manipulation. You no longer buy what they sell. You become immune to guilt, to shame, to emotional blackmail disguised as morality. True joy is revolutionary. It threatens the systems that rely on your dissatisfaction. It threatens the culture that markets self-hatred as self-improvement. It threatens the internal hierarchy you've built where suffering equals virtue and peace equals weakness. So, you must rebel, but not with violence, with vision. Start by interrogating your inner narrative. Every time you hear that inner voice whisper, "I don't deserve this," or "It's too good to last," don't just ignore it. Drag it into the light. Demand it speak plainly. Where did it come from? Who taught you that joy is unsafe? Whose fears are you still carrying? This isn't positive thinking. This is psychological warfare. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The rebellion begins in the shadow, in the dark alleys of your mind where you've locked away your capacity for delight, because it didn't feel safe. Unlock it. Give yourself permission to enjoy things without justification, to rest without earning it, to laugh without looking over your shoulder, to feel pleasure without apology. Then, go further. Identify the rituals of your resistance. Maybe it's journaling with savage honesty. Maybe it's walking barefoot in the grass just to remind your body it's alive. Maybe it's quitting a job that bleeds you dry, or saying no to a relationship that mistakes your silence for consent. Whatever it is, do it with intention. Not because it's easy, but because your soul is not a storage unit for other people's projections. And if you falter because you don't make yourself a villain in your own story. You are not broken. You are not late. You are not lazy. You are unlearning generations of emotional malnourishment in a world built to profit from your starvation. Arthur Schopenhauer argued that much of human behavior stems from the will to survive rather than the will to be happy. But you are not bound to that instinct. You are not a creature of reflex. You are a creature of choice. Choose differently. Reclaim agency over your desires. Rewrite the myths of your childhood. Forgive your past self not because they were wrong, but because they were surviving with tools you no longer need. And then create spaces where joy is normalized. Conversations where pain is honored, but not worshipped. Relationships where people don't bond over their shared misery, but over their shared aliveness. This is not idealism. This is resurrection. Think of Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in suffering inside concentration camps. He didn't teach us to embrace pain for pain's sake. He taught us to find purpose through it. But once the lesson is learned, the pain must not become your home. Leave it. Joy is not a reward. It's your birthright. And yes, it's terrifying because stepping into happiness means relinquishing the familiarity of your wounds. It means facing life without the emotional armor you've been taught to wear like skin. It means letting go of the comfort that suffering gave you, a strange, toxic comfort, but comfort nonetheless. But this is the only way forward. Every generation has its revolutionaries. Yours may not carry flags or fight wars. Yours may sit quietly at the dinner table, choosing peace over performance. Yours may be the artist who stops painting pain and dares to depict joy. Yours may be you saying enough, not in anger, but in liberation, because you're not just breaking patterns, you're birthing a new self. A self that doesn't flinch at hope, a self that believes in light without needing to stare into the dark first, a self that walks through the door of joy and doesn't apologize for how loud the laughter echoes behind them. So rebel not just against the world, but against the part of you that fears happiness, because that part is not your truth. It's your inheritance, and it's time to return it. Now you've arrived, not at a summit, but at the edge of everything you once believed. You're standing on the crumbling border between two worlds, the one you were taught to survive in, and the one you are finally beginning to live in. But here's the final truth, the one most people will never dare to whisper, let alone accept. You were never afraid of not being happy. You were afraid of what happiness would demand of you. Because happiness is not easy. It is not passive. It is not something that falls into your lap while you scroll through someone else's curated highlight reel. Happiness is active. It requires presence, courage, responsibility, and perhaps most terrifying of all, self-honesty. You've been conditioned to chase happiness like it's a finish line and achievement. But real happiness doesn't come after the job, the relationship, the money, or the praise. It comes after the war within yourself has ended. And here's where the paradox reaches its final crescendo. Most people don't want that kind of happiness. Why? Because it costs everything they've used to define themselves. Their trauma, their pain stories, their martyrdom, their victimhood, their lifelong identity as someone who has been wronged by life. To truly be happy, you must give all of that up. You must forgive, not just others but yourself. You must stop reenacting old betrayals. You must stop making deals with misery. You must stop waiting for your life to finally reflect your worth, and instead start living as if it already does. And that is terrifying, because without your suffering, who are you? Without your wounds as badges of honor, what do you offer the world? This is the ultimate truth. Happiness is not a feeling. It is a decision, a discipline, a way of being. And most people would rather be right about how hard life is than be free to experience how beautiful it can become. There's a quiet power in choosing happiness when there's no applause for it, when no one sees it, when it doesn't get posted or praised or even fully understood. It's the kind of power that grows roots, not followers. It's the power to live from joy, not just toward it. And this kind of joy is deeply spiritual. It's not giddy. It's not shallow. It's not found in the highs of dopamine-driven pleasures. It's found in moments of truth, in deep breaths after forgiveness, in mornings without dread, in nights where your thoughts are no longer battlegrounds. It is contentment without resignation, peace without denial, gratitude without performance. You start to realize the point of life is not to escape suffering at all costs. The point is to become someone who can suffer and still sing, someone who can grieve and still believe, someone who can carry pain without letting it poison their perception of beauty. This is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of amor fati, love of fate, not passive acceptance, but a deep, burning yes to life. In all its chaos and contradiction, you stop trying to edit your emotions and start embodying your wholeness. You feel fear and let it walk beside hope. You feel sadness and let it sit next to gratitude. You stop separating your emotional states into categories of good and bad, and you begin to see that happiness is not the absence of darkness, but the ability to carry light through it. And that's when the world begins to look different. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You start noticing small miracles, a stranger's smile, the sun falling through trees, the silence between arguments, the clarity that rises after the storm, the way your soul still whispers, more is possible, even when your mind is tired. You start living not in fear of losing joy, but in awe that you can create it again and again. And maybe the most liberating part, you stop trying to convince others to come with you. You realize not everyone wants to be free. Not everyone is ready to trade their chains for wings. Some are still bargaining with misery, still holding hands with fear, still addicted to the familiarity of pain. You let them be, and you walk on, because your happiness is not rebellion anymore, it's your reality. You no longer ask for permission to feel alive. You no longer seek external validation to believe in your own worth. You no longer sacrifice your peace on the altar of someone else's approval. You are finally home, not in a place, not in a person, but in yourself. And this is the final, sacred truth. Happiness was never missing. It was never outside of you. It was waiting for you to choose it, not as a reward, but as a revolution. Now, look around. The air is quieter. The weight is gone. The war is over. And you, yes, you are still here. Wiser, freer, real. Welcome to your life.